It's lovely to see you all. Kind of feel very aware of the snow and all the different places that people are in. And as I was sitting just then, I was thinking about how I gave some version of this talk last Thursday in the evening. And I was I was just noticing, I feel kind of meaner that sort of talking about death in the morning. It was such a funny feeling of like, oh, this feels a bit more unkind. So I was really just sort of working with that, um, and and that's kind of a bit like the talk in a way is how do we talk about this thing without, without hitting those edges? So, just like we've kind of begun with, I know you're sitting in snow in Sheffield, and don't know what it's like around anywhere else, but I wanted to begin today with a kind of flurry of quotes because one of the things that becomes really clear is this thing, or inevitable finitude, is just a thing that so many people have grappled with, and we keep grappling with. So my flurry of quotes is Dag Hammarskjöld, who was a UN secretary, a really interesting guy. But he said, for all that has been, thanks, and to all that shall be, yes. To all that has been, thanks, and to all that shall be, yes. Rilke wrote, death is our friend precisely because it brings us into absolute and passionate presence with all that is here, that is natural, that is love. Death is our friend precisely because it brings us into an absolute and passionate presence with all that is here, that is natural, that is love. Wes Niska said, in some sense, the act of mindfulness meditation itself could be understood as a practice of dying to each moment. If you get good at it, your last moment will be easier. There's something about that. Oh, maybe one of the benefits of sitting is we'll die a little easier. Who knows? Mark Twain said, nothing is ever at rest. Wood, iron, water. Everything is alive. Everything is raging, whirling, whizzing, day and night, night and day. Nothing is dead. There is no such thing as death. Everything is full of bristling life, tremendous life, even the bones of the crusader that perished before Jerusalem 8 centuries ago. So death and no death. What is it we're talking about? And I think that as long as we've been humans and had the capacity for consciousness, we've created narratives around the inevitable fact of our death. Narratives that comfort, narratives that terrify, narratives that soothe, narratives that try and make sense. We're all trying to get some sense of what does it mean to be so here and so not here, to have loved people who are so here and so not here. And what do we do with that? As I was scrolling through some social media, as I much want to do, I heard Jack Cornfield begin quoting a haiku by Issa. I was immediately drawn to it and did my little, I'll just go and find it. And I went on to Ecosia to find out about it. And I found the haiku. But then I couldn't find where I'd found Jack Cornfield from. So there was much toing and froing. And I couldn't remember what I'd been looking at. And now I had the haiku and not the Jack Cornfield quote. So it felt so kind of appropriate. There was something so fitting to hear this little fragment and to go chasing after it and then lose the source. And there was something about that itself felt like, oh, this is what it's like. We have these little fleeting glimpses of something that feels true. And then we go chasing off after something else and then we lose it. Anyway, I did find the haiku. And the haiku is written by Issa, a Japanese poet who was writing in the 18th century. And at that time, that many images of fleeting dew, you will all have heard other poems, haiku, that have that sense of the dew. And so it was a familiar image of the sweet fleetingness of life. And this little haiku is, dew evaporates, and all our world is dew, so dear, so fresh, so fleeting. Dew evaporates, and all our world is dew, so dear, so fresh, so fleeting. But then, if you listen to this again, in the context of a man whose life was ravaged by loss, his mother died when he was 2, he lived with his grandmother, and then that stopped. His whole world was full of temporariness, of change. And he wrote this particular haiku. He wrote thousands, but he wrote this particular haiku after the death of his daughter. Dew evaporates, and all our world is dew, so dear, so fresh, so fleeting. How do we navigate our precious time on the dewdrop world to live fully in the, and yet so fresh, so fleeting? He wrote another one. This dewdrop world is a dewdrop world, and yet. And it feels to me like the grace of our lives is finding ways to inhabit the and yet. Last week, Flint shared Myogen Steve Stuckey, who was then abbot of San Francisco Zen Center, his journey once he'd been received a terminal diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. It's a story I've known for a while and really appreciated. He said he would get up every morning and say gratitude, not gratitude for anything, not gratitude, just gratitude. And I thought of the way that same cancer took our dear friend Ginny, who died within 19 days of her diagnosis. And the impact that had on her life and the lives of those around us. And Myogen said near the end of his life, each of us can do something right up until the last moment. And at 70, I can feel the way the last moment is not as far away as it used to be. And I'm figuring out what it is. What is my doing something? I'm aware that for me, death has felt a long time like a companion for me. And of course, all of us will know that there are many, many kinds of deaths, like the death of the death of mindfulness, letting go of the moment we've just had, but also not just the end of life, the death of hope, of ambition, of love, of health, of ambition, trust. We've all been touched by those little deaths, even while we've carried on living. And also, of course, the deaths of ones close to us, and important or not important. For many years, I worked as a supervisor at therapists who are working with those affected by cancer. So it was a place of loss of all sorts. And then later I was the manager of the center, offering counseling and complementary therapies. And when I was a trainer, I taught modules on death and loss. And I personally was constantly surprised and not surprised by our culture's deep deep death averseness. We do not like it. We don't like talking about it. We don't like thinking about it. It's like we have to drag it into the picture. It's not something that I've personally had an issue with for all sorts of reasons. And some would say it's interesting that we often use the phrase a morbid fascination with death. It's like there's something pathologically wrong with us. If we focus on death, we find it that difficult. Lara Rochefald said, neither the sun nor death can be looked at steadily. And there is something about how do we kind of let it slide into our vision? How do we actually let it inhabit our lives? I was watching a program about children with terminal illnesses. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And a palliative care pediatrician said in the program that many pediatric doctors say when the child's condition is not going to get better, that it's too soon. It's too soon to get palliative care involved, that the parents and caregivers aren't ready. And the consultant said something that really struck me. She said, if we wait until they are ready, we have done them a terrible disservice. If we wait until they're ready, we've done them a terrible disservice. And she quoted statistics that actually showed that when palliative care was introduced, the sickness in the family was reduced. There were fewer hospital procedures, and interesting, the child lived on average 3 months longer. There's something about literally evidence that turning towards, that getting ready for, that facing made things better. Not child didn't get weller, child didn't live, but something about it made it a different landing. When I was working in the cancer center, the statistics then were something like over 40% of cancer treatment drugs, not palliative care drugs, were used in the last 6 months of life. And in some places, so-called aggressive treatments continued in over 70% of patients within weeks to days of death. Not palliative care, not pain relief, cancer treatments to prolong life, to cure, were used up to within days of death, mostly because the cancer patients hadn't been told they were dying, or their families couldn't let them die, or the doctors couldn't stop being doctors of life. But for me, there was something so profound in this statement. If we wait until they're ready, we have done them a terrible disservice. It reminded me a lot of a poem by Mary Howe, who wrote a book of poems after her brother died of AIDS. The last time we had dinner together in a restaurant with white tablecloths, he leaned forward and took my 2 hands in his and said, I'm going to die soon. I want you to know that. And I said, I think I do know. And he said, what surprises me is you don't. And I said, I do. And he said, what? And I said, know that you're going to die. And he said, no, I mean know that you are. We're all going to die, and what a disservice we offer ourselves and those we're connected to when we don't share that with ourselves. I had a practice for quite a long time at the end of every day of thinking about my day and all that it had held, and then giving thanks for another day of life. And also in that, acknowledging I am therefore one day closer to my death. Each day a little closer. I found this an enlivening and heartwarming practice. My sister died at 56, and for many years when I was younger, for no reason I've ever been able to understand, I had believed I wouldn't live past 56. And here I am, and here is not my sister. And also I had for many years, I managed a really suicidal part that had always held the option that if life got too much, too tiresome to continue trying, I would have agency and kill myself. Working on this with this part, and in some ways, after many decades, finally committing to being fully alive. I do realize the delusory nature of this. I was alive the whole time, whether I committed to it or not, but hey ho, parts like to believe themselves. Then I finally really treasured, I am alive and this precious and rare space of conscious awareness, and I won't be here forever. Marie Howe says again, I had no idea that the gate I would step through to finally enter this world would be the space my brother's body made. What can we do? What can help us to navigate this precious, fleeting dewdrop world? What do you do? What do you do right now? What do you do every day that allows you to hold the preciousness of your life? There's the formal practice of the 5 remembrances. I'm subject to aging. There's no way to avoid aging. I'm subject to ill health. There's no way to avoid illness. I am going to die. There is no way to avoid death. Everyone and everything that I love will change, and I will be separated from them. My only true possessions are my actions, and I cannot escape their consequences. This is a formal practice. Some people find it really challenging and unpleasant and difficult. I would suggest, if you're interested, it's really worth sticking with and finding a way to make that your friend, that the 5 remembrances are the underpinnings of what being alive is. The astronomer Brian Cox has a particular take on this importance of our precious lives that I love. You can watch this little clip if you're that way inclined. It's all over the place. But he says when hearing people who want more from life and they say that this can't be it, he says, what more do you want? When I see people who say that they want more, there must be more to it. What do you mean? The ingredients in our bodies were assembled in the hearts of long dead stars over billions of years and have assembled themselves spontaneously into temporary structures that can think and feel and explore. And then those structures will decay away again at some point. And in the very far future, there will be no structures left. So there we are. We exist in this little window and observe this magnificent universe. Why do you want any more? And there's something about his kind of amazement about here we are, assembled spontaneously, temporary structures. All is impermanent, quickly passing. No thought, no feeling, no institution, no tree, no river, ever lasts. A while back, Flint said in inquiry when he had COVID, and he shared a koan about Tozan being sick. It's Tozan illness, case 94. Attention, Tozan was ill. A monk asked, Osho, you're sick. Is there someone who is not sick? And Tozan answered, yes, there is. The monk answered, does the one who is not sick look after you? Tozan replied, this old monk is able to look after others. The monk asked, Osho, how about when you look after others? Tozan said, then the having of sickness is not seen. The koan invites us to think about who is sick and who is dying, and whether we can take care of ourselves and take care of others. We're always sick and we're always dying. We're always not sick and we're always not dying. The Buddha started his quest because he wanted to eliminate the suffering of sickness, old age, and death. But Basho commented that the ancients who were about to die frolicked, I love that word, frolicked in the realm of old age, sickness, and death. Is that what Tozan's doing? frolicking with sickness and old age and death. I love this next bit. When Tozan was ready to die, he composed a poem for the assembly, shaved his head, sat erect, and died. And then everybody started crying and wailing so much that he opened his eyes and scolded them for not giving a dead man any peace. He roused himself to prepare a meal for them, which he called a stupidity meal, to the chagrin of his students. And he extended his life for 7 more days, and then he bade them farewell again. He was frolicking, and he still had so much more to teach. I learned about that gracious dance of death and loss from the people I've been with. My sister Carrie, my lovely Dharma sister Carrie, and I treasuring right towards the end of her life, sending each other photographs of the falling petals of peonies. Ginny opening to being loved as her body failed. How do we use this fact of death to enliven us? How do we use it to live, as Susan Moon says, until we're dead? Though the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death saves us. Marvin Yalom says, though the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death saves us. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who is a wonderful contadora, storyteller and psychotherapist, she has some beautiful stories about death. In one of her stories about death, she says, our death is born with our birth and walks alongside us throughout our entire lives. Our death is born with us at our birth and walks alongside us our entire lives. How do we make friends with it? To acknowledge that we're constantly walking with this shared death, the shared walk of life and death, all the time, whether we're looking or not looking. How do we be the one who is dying and the one who is living? How do we not do ourselves this terrible disservice of waiting until we're ready? At the end of one of Mary Oliver's poems, which was one of the very, very first ones that I fell in love with, on Blackwater Pond or in Blackwater Woods, she said, to live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things, only 3. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. And then there is this poem, which I wrote on the death of my dear friend Tricia. Alive or dead. Our friend travelled with us, tucked into her coffee tin. We had spades and trowels ready to dig her, to make her snug into the wider open world under her favourite tree, which overlooks the ever-changing sea and sky. What we found were spaces already made by life under the generous tree. Nestling her there, sheltered by a root, we took turns to spoon her back into the earth. Now I like to imagine small grains of her being carried on fur and skin and paws, padding out into the ferns and the mosses and the swaying harebells. The great tree roots inhaling her and sending cells upwards through sap until on the tip of some soaring branch and through the exhalation of a leaf, she flies away into the waiting sky, returned, alive or dead. Thank you.